Lieutenant Commander Helen Price opened her eyes and felt the cold metal floor beneath her body. Her wrists hurt from the energy cuffs that bound her hands together in front of her chest. The low hum of engines filled her ears as the massive transport train moved across the wasteland that used to be her home. She looked around the cargo hold and counted at least 60 other prisoners sitting against the walls with their heads down and their hope gone. Most of them were humans like her, but a few were from other conquered species that the Valtorians had enslaved over the years. The alien empire had swept across Earth 5 years ago with weapons and ships that made human military forces look like children throwing stones at tanks. Helen remembered the day the sky turned red with their atmospheric entry burns, and how the governments of Earth fell within 3 months of the invasion starting. She had been a naval officer commanding a destroyer in the Pacific Fleet when the Valtorians arrived. Her ship lasted 4 hours in combat before a plasma beam cut it in half and sent her and 30 crew members into the ocean. They swam to shore and joined the resistance that formed in the mountains of California. For 4 years, she fought with whatever weapons they could steal or build from salvaged parts. She learned to move in the shadows and strike fast before disappearing into the wilderness. The resistance called her the Ghost Commander because she never stayed in one place long enough for the Valtorians to catch her. But 3 weeks ago, her luck ran out during a raid on a supply depot outside the ruins of San Francisco. A patrol caught her team by surprise and killed everyone, except Helen, who they captured alive. Because the Valtorians wanted to question resistance leaders before sending them to the mining colonies. The transport train was taking her and the other prisoners to a launch facility where shuttles would carry them up to the orbital station. From there, they would be loaded onto freighters bound for Europa, where the Valtorians had established massive mining operations beneath the frozen surface of Jupiter's moon. No one ever came back from Europa because the work was brutal, and the environment was deadly, and the Valtorians did not waste resources on keeping slaves alive once they stopped being useful. Helen knew she had maybe 2 weeks left to live if she did nothing. The train would reach the launch facility in 6 hours, and after that, her chances of escape would drop to 0. She had been watching the guards for the past hour, looking for any weakness in their routine. The Valtorians were efficient, but they were also arrogant, and they did not expect much resistance from bound prisoners who were already defeated in spirit. Helen noticed something strange about her energy cuffs. They flickered for just a moment when the train passed over a section of track. She waited and watched, and sure enough, when they crossed another section, the cuffs flickered again. Someone in the resistance must have planted electromagnetic pulse devices along the transport routes to interfere with Valtorian technology. The pulses were not strong enough to disable the cuffs completely, but they weakened them for brief moments. Helen began working her wrists back and forth, testing the bonds. The cuffs were designed to tighten if prisoners struggled, but during the flickers, they loosened just enough for her to gain a fraction of an inch. She kept working slowly and carefully so the guards would not notice. Her wrists started bleeding from the friction, but she ignored the pain. After 20 minutes of patient effort, her right hand slipped free during one of the electromagnetic pulses. She kept her hands together, pretending the cuffs were still engaged. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the cargo hold, planning her next move. The emergency hatch was on the far wall about 30 feet away. 2 Valtorian guards stood near the main door, talking in their guttural language that sounded like rocks grinding together. They carried plasma rifles that could burn through steel and wore armor that could deflect most human weapons. Helen had no weapons and no backup, but she had surprise and desperation. She slowly stood up, trying to look weak and defeated. One of the guards glanced at her but looked away, dismissing her as no threat. Helen took a step toward the emergency hatch, then another. The train swayed as it took a curve, and she used the motion to stumble forward, covering more distance. The guards were arguing about something now and not paying attention to the prisoners. Helen reached the emergency hatch and grabbed the manual release lever. The moment she pulled it, alarms started blaring throughout the train. The hatch blew open and wind screamed into the cargo hold. Both guards spun toward her, raising their weapons. Helen did not hesitate or think about what she was doing. She jumped. The ground was rushing past at incredible speed far below. The desert landscape was a blur of red rocks and brown sand. Helen realized she had just committed suicide because no human could survive a fall at this speed. The train was moving at least 200 miles per hour, and the impact would turn her body into pulp. But she preferred death on her own terms rather than slow death in the Europa mines. The wind tore at her clothes and hair as she fell. She saw the guards pointing down at her from the open hatch, but they did not shoot because why waste ammunition on someone who was already dead? The ground rushed up to meet her and Helen closed, her eyes waiting for the end. But the impact never came the way she expected. Instead, she felt something wrap around her body like an invisible cushion. Her fall slowed dramatically, and when she hit the rocky ground, she rolled hard but survived. Pain shot through her left shoulder and ribs, but nothing felt broken. She lay there for a moment, unable to believe she was alive. Then she heard the high-pitched whine of hunter drones. The Valtorians had released their automated pursuit units to track her down. Helen forced herself to stand despite the pain. Blood ran down her arm from where the energy cuffs had cut her wrists. She started running toward a cluster of large boulders, hoping to find cover. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions with nowhere to hide. 3 beetle-shaped drones crested a ridge behind her, moving fast on their anti-gravity drives. Red targeting lasers painted her back. Helen heard the weapons charging and knew the next sound would be her last. Then, cutting through the desert silence, a child's voice called out in words Helen did not understand, followed by English. "Papa, save her." Helen stumbled over a rock and nearly fell as the hunter drones closed the distance between them. She could hear their mechanical humming getting louder with each passing second. The targeting lasers tracked her movements with perfect precision. She knew these machines never missed their targets because they were designed for hunting down escaped prisoners and rebel fighters. Her lungs burned from running in the thin desert air, and her injured shoulder sent spikes of agony through her body with every step. The boulders she was running toward seemed impossibly far away, even though they were only 50 yards ahead. The first energy bolt hit the ground 3 feet to her left and exploded in a spray of superheated sand and rock. The blast wave knocked her sideways, but somehow she kept her feet under her and kept running. The drones were toying with her, or maybe their targeting systems were still calibrating after the long flight from the transport train. Either way, Helen knew she had seconds left before they stopped missing. The child's voice rang out again from somewhere behind the boulders. Helen could not see who was speaking, but the voice was high and clear, and spoke with absolute certainty that whoever Papa was, he would save her. Helen wanted to shout at the child to run and hide because children should not be anywhere near hunter drones, but she had no breath left for shouting. The second energy bolt struck even closer, and this time the heat washed over her back like opening an oven door. Her uniform started smoking. The drones were moving into position for kill shots. Helen threw herself forward in a desperate dive, hoping to reach the boulders before the machines ended her. She hit the ground hard and rolled. Pain exploded in her ribs. She looked up and saw all 3 drones hovering in a line with their weapons glowing bright red as they charged for simultaneous fire. There was nowhere left to run and nothing she could do. Helen closed her eyes and thought about her crew on the destroyer and her parents, who died in the first year of the invasion, and all the people she had failed to save. Then a man appeared between her and the drones. He moved so fast Helen barely saw him leave the cover of the boulders. One moment the space was empty, and the next he was standing there like he had always been there. He was tall and powerfully built with long black hair tied back in a traditional style. He wore what looked like a combination of old ceremonial clothing and advanced armor that gleamed with patterns Helen had never seen before. His face was marked with war paint in black and red. In his hands he carried a weapon that looked like someone had fused an ancient war lance with technology that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The man planted the base of the lance on the ground and began speaking in a language that sounded like wind and thunder mixed together. A dome of shimmering blue energy erupted from the lance and spread out to cover both him and Helen. The hunter drones fired. 3 energy bolts hit the shield at the same instant and splashed across its surface like water hitting glass. The dome held without even flickering. Helen stared in shock. She had seen a lot of alien technology in the past 5 years, but nothing human forces possessed could stop hunter drone weapons. The drones adjusted their flight patterns and prepared to fire again from different angles. The man raised his lance high and continued chanting. His voice grew louder and the lance began glowing brighter and brighter until Helen had to look away. Then he thrust the lance forward like throwing a spear, except he kept hold of it. 3 bolts of white light shot from the tip. Each one hit a hunter drone dead center. The machines exploded one after another in rapid succession. Burning debris rained down across the desert. The whole thing was over in less than 10 seconds. Silence fell over the desert. Helen lay on the ground, unable to process what she had just witnessed. The man turned to face her and lowered his lance. His eyes were dark and calm and held no surprise at what he had just done. "Get behind me," he said in perfect English. His voice was deep and steady. Helen tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. A small girl ran out from behind the boulders. She looked about 7 years old with long black hair and 2 neat braids and bright intelligent eyes that sparkled with excitement. She wore a simple dress that had circuit-like patterns woven into the fabric. The girl ran straight to Helen and took her hand. "You are safe now," the girl said. "Papa never loses." Helen looked at the child and then at the man and could not find words. The girl pulled gently on her hand, helping her stand. "My name is Little Bird," the girl continued. "What is your name?" "Helen Price," Helen managed to say. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "Are you really from the sky train?" Little Bird asked. "Did you really jump? I saw you falling and told Papa to save you." The man walked over and looked at Helen with concern. "You are injured," he said. "And you are far from any resistance camps I know. How did you survive the fall?" Helen touched her shoulder and felt blood soaking through her uniform. "I do not know," she admitted. "Something slowed me down before I hit the ground." The man and Little Bird exchanged a look. "The keepers," the man said quietly. "They must have been watching." Helen had no idea what he meant. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Daniel Redhawk. I am chief of what remains of my people. This is my daughter Little Bird. We live not far from here in a place the Valtorians have not found. You are welcome to come with us for healing and food." Helen looked back toward the horizon where the transport train had long since disappeared. She thought about the other prisoners still on board, heading for certain death. Then she looked at the destroyed hunter drones and at the man who had just saved her life with technology. She did not understand. Nothing made sense. She had been told all the tribes were wiped out in the first year of the invasion. Everyone knew that. The Valtorians had targeted the reservations and rural areas first, to eliminate populations they thought would resist most strongly. Intelligence reports said there were no survivors. "You should not exist," Helen said. "The records say your people are gone." Daniel's expression darkened. The Valtorians wanted everyone to think that, he replied. They wanted to eliminate hope. "But some of us survived and we have been fighting ever since. Come, we need to move before more drones arrive. The Valtorians will have detected the destruction of their hunters." Helen nodded. She had no other options. Little Bird took her hand again and smiled up at her. "You are brave to jump from the sky train," she said. "I want to be brave like you when I grow up." Helen looked at this strange child who spoke with such confidence and wondered what kind of world allowed 7-year-olds to witness battles with hunter drones. Daniel started walking toward the boulders. "Follow me," he said. "The path is hidden but safe." Helen followed because she had nowhere else to go and because something deep inside told her that jumping from that train had been the beginning of something important. Daniel led them through a narrow passage between 2 massive red rock formations. Little Bird walked beside Helen, still holding her hand and chattering about everything she saw. "Look at that lizard," she said, pointing at a small creature sunning itself on a stone. "We have many lizards near our home." "Do you like lizards?" Helen barely heard the child. She was too busy watching Daniel move ahead of them. He walked with absolute confidence, never hesitating even though the path seemed to disappear and reappear randomly. After a few minutes, Helen realized what was happening. The landscape itself was shifting around them. Not physically, but visually. Someone had set up holographic projectors that made solid paths look like impassable rock walls and made cliffs appear where there were actually gentle slopes. The technology was far beyond anything the Resistance possessed. Helen had seen Valtorian camouflage systems before, but this was different. This felt older somehow and more elegant in its design. "How long have you been hiding here?" Helen asked Daniel. "Since the invasion began," he replied without turning around. "We saw the ships coming before they entered the atmosphere. The keepers warned us 3 days in advance. We had time to gather supplies and reach this place." Helen wanted to ask who the keepers were, but Little Bird distracted her by pulling on her hand. "We are almost home," the girl said excitedly. "You will meet Grandmother Willow. She is very wise and very old, but she can heal anything. Once I fell and broke my arm and Grandmother fixed it in 2 days." Helen looked down at the child. "Your arm healed in 2 days?" Little Bird nodded enthusiastically. "Grandmother has special medicine from the keepers. She can probably fix your shoulder before dinner." Helen touched her injured shoulder again. The pain had dulled to a constant ache, but she knew the joint was damaged. Normal healing would take weeks or months if it healed properly at all. They emerged from the maze of canyons into an opening that made Helen stop walking. Before her stood a massive cavern entrance carved into the side of a mesa. But that was not what stunned her. As they approached the entrance, the air itself seemed to peel back like a curtain, and suddenly Helen could see past another layer of holographic projection. Inside the cavern was an entire village. Adobe-style buildings mixed with structures made from materials Helen did not recognize. Gardens grew under artificial sunlight that came from panels embedded in the cavern ceiling. She counted at least 100 people moving through the village going about daily tasks. Children played in a central plaza while adults worked at various stations. Some were crafting weapons. Others tended the gardens. Still others monitored banks of holographic displays that showed surveillance footage of the surrounding area. Everyone looked healthy and purposeful. This was not a group of desperate refugees hiding in fear. This was a thriving community. "Welcome to New Valley of the Living Rocks," Daniel said. "We call it by the old name in our language, but that is the English translation." Helen walked forward in a daze. Little Bird ran ahead calling out to friends. Other children ran to meet her, and they formed a laughing group that raced toward the plaza. Adults looked up as Daniel passed and nodded respectfully. Some stared at Helen with curiosity, but none seemed hostile. An elderly woman approached from one of the larger buildings. She wore a traditional dress decorated with the same circuit patterns Helen had seen on Little Bird's clothing. Her hair was silver and long, and her face carried deep lines that spoke of both wisdom and sorrow. Her eyes were sharp and kind at the same time. "Daniel," this woman said, "you have brought us a wounded bird." Her voice was gentle but strong. "This is Grandmother Willow," Daniel said, "our healer and keeper of stories." "Grandmother, this is Lieutenant Commander Helen Price. She jumped from a Valtorian prison transport and survived the fall." Grandmother Willow looked at Helen with those sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "A warrior," she said, "like Daniel. Come, child, let me tend to your wounds and then you will eat. You look like you have not had a proper meal in many days. Daniel, bring her to my dwelling." Grandmother turned and walked toward a building near the center of the village. Daniel gestured for Helen to follow. As they walked through the village, Helen tried to process what she was seeing. The technology here was incredible, but it was integrated so naturally with traditional living that it did not feel jarring. A woman ground corn using a stone matat while watching a holographic display that showed weather patterns. A man carved wood into what looked like ceremonial objects while his child practiced with a training version of the plasma lance Daniel carried. Everything was a blend of old and new working together in harmony. They reached Grandmother Willow's dwelling and entered through a doorway covered with a woven blanket. Inside, the space was larger than it appeared from outside. The walls were carved from living rock and covered with shelves holding jars of herbs and medical equipment that looked far too advanced for Earth. A examination table sat in the center, made from the same unknown material as some of the buildings outside. "Sit," Grandmother said, pointing at the table. Helen sat and tried not to wince as the movement pulled her injured shoulder. Grandmother began removing Helen's torn uniform jacket with practiced efficiency. She examined the shoulder with gentle fingers, then made a thoughtful sound. "Dislocated and torn ligaments," she said. "Painful but fixable." She moved to one of the shelves and began mixing something in a bowl. "This will hurt less than you expect," she said. Daniel stood by the doorway, keeping watch. Little Bird appeared beside him. "Is she going to be okay?" the girl asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Grandmother can heal anything. Can she stay with us?" Daniel looked at Helen. "That is her choice to make, Little Bird. We do not force people to stay. But I hope she stays," Little Bird said. "I like her. She is brave." Daniel smiled and touched his daughter's head. "She's brave," he agreed. Grandmother returned with a bowl of paste that smelled like mint and something else Helen could not identify. The old woman spread the paste over Helen's shoulder. The pain disappeared almost instantly, replaced by a warm, tingling sensation. Grandmother produced what looked like a bandage, but when she wrapped it around Helen's shoulder, the material seemed to bond with her skin and glow faintly. "Nanotechnology," Grandmother explained, seeing Helen's expression. "The keepers taught us to make it. The bandage will repair damaged tissue and dissolve when healing is complete. By tomorrow, your shoulder will feel much better. By 3 days, it will be completely healed." Helen stared at the glowing bandage. This kind of medical technology was decades beyond anything Earth had developed before the invasion. "Where did you get all this?" she asked. "Who are these keepers you keep mentioning?" Grandmother and Daniel exchanged looks. That is a long story, grandmother said, and you need food and rest before we discuss such things. But I will tell you this much, child. 50 years ago, my grandmother made contact with beings from beyond the stars, not conquerors like the Valtorians. Teachers. They saw something in our people that they valued, and they offered to share their knowledge. We accepted. We learned. We prepared. And when the Valtorians came, we were ready. Helen felt her mind reeling. 50 years ago. That meant some group had known alien contact was possible and prepared for it, while the rest of the world remained ignorant. Why did you not warn anyone? Helen asked. Why let the rest of us get caught by surprise? Grandmother's expression grew sad. We tried, she said quietly. We sent warnings to your governments. We offered to share what we knew. They called us crazy. They threatened to take our technology by force. So we stopped trying to convince them and focused on survival. We could not save everyone, but we could save our own. When the invasion began, we reached out again, offering shelter to anyone who could reach us. Some came, most did not. Many thought we were a trap set by the Valtorians. Helen understood that logic. In the chaos of the invasion, trust had been impossible. She had turned away refugees herself when her resistance cell could not afford to feed extra mouths. Survival had made everyone suspicious. I am sorry, grandmother said. I know you think we should have done more. Perhaps you are right. But we are doing what we can now. We saved you today. We will continue saving others when we can. Helen nodded slowly. She was too tired to be angry. Daniel spoke from the doorway. You have 3 choices, Lieutenant Commander. You can rest here for a few days and then we will help you return to your resistance cell. Or you can stay here with us as long as you wish. Or you can hear our full story and decide if you want to help us with something bigger. The third choice brought a pause to the conversation. Helen looked at Daniel, then at grandmother, then at little Bird, who was watching her with those bright, hopeful eyes. What is the third choice? Helen asked. We are planning to strike at the heart of the Valtorian occupation, Daniel said. We have the technology and the warriors. What we need is a military strategist who understands combined operations. We need someone who commanded ships and coordinated complex battles. We need you. Helen stared at Daniel, trying to understand what he was asking. The Valtorians had crushed every major military force on Earth within months of their arrival. They had orbital superiority and weapons that made human technology look primitive. The resistance had been fighting for 5 years with stolen supplies and desperate tactics that barely slowed the occupation. Now this man was talking about striking at the heart of their enemy, as if it were actually possible. What kind of strike? Helen asked, keeping her voice neutral. Daniel crossed his arms. 3 months ago, our scouts discovered the Valtorians are building something massive in what used to be Nevada, a dimensional gateway large enough to bring their entire battle fleet through from their home galaxy. If they succeed, Earth becomes a permanent military base for their expansion into this sector of space. Helen felt cold fear settle in her stomach. A dimensional gateway meant reinforcements. It meant the occupation would never end. How long until it becomes operational? She asked. Our best estimates say 4 months, Daniel replied. Maybe 5. We need to destroy it before then. Helen looked at Grandmother Willow. You said you have technology from these keepers. Is it enough to assault a Valtorian military installation? Grandmother smiled. Come, she said. Let me show you what we have. She led Helen deeper into the dwelling through a doorway that opened into a tunnel, carved into the mesa. Daniel and Little Bird followed. The tunnel was lit by the same kind of glowing panels Helen had seen in the main cavern. They walked for several minutes, going deeper underground. Finally, they emerged into a massive chamber that took Helen's breath away. The space was easily 200 feet across and filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction story. Racks of weapons lined one wall. Each one was a work of art combining traditional designs with advanced technology. There were lances like Daniel carried, bows that fired energy arrows, blades that could cut through Valtorian armor. Body armor hung on stands displaying designs that would stop plasma bolts while remaining lightweight and flexible. Against another wall sat vehicles that hovered on anti-gravity drives. They looked fast and maneuverable with weapon systems built into sleek frames. But what dominated the center of the chamber was something Helen had only seen in classified military briefings from before the war. A holographic tactical display showing real-time satellite imagery of North America. Red markers indicated Valtorian installations. Blue markers showed known resistance cells. Green markers represented hidden villages like this one. Helen counted 6 green markers scattered across the western states. All this is keeper technology, Helen said. Not all, Grandmother replied. Much of it is human creativity combined with keeper knowledge. They gave us the tools and taught us the principles. We adapted them to our needs and our ways. The keepers do not believe in simply handing over weapons. They believe in teaching understanding so that knowledge can grow and evolve. Helen walked to the tactical display and studied it. She had commanded naval operations from displays like this. She understood how to read tactical situations and identify strategic targets. The Nevada installation Daniel mentioned was clearly marked with a large red circle. Surrounding it were sensor stations and patrol routes and defensive emplacements. Taking that target would require coordination and firepower, and most importantly, timing. "How many warriors do you have?" Helen asked. "Here in this village we have 60 trained fighters," Daniel replied. "The other 5 villages have similar numbers. In total we can field about 300 warriors." Helen did some quick calculations. 300 fighters against a major Valtorian installation was suicide, unless those fighters had overwhelming technological advantages. "What about your weapons? How effective are they against Valtorian shields and armor?" Daniel walked to the weapon racks and picked up one of the energy lances. "These can punch through any Valtorian armor," he said. "The shields we generate can stop their plasma weapons. Our vehicles are faster and more maneuverable than their patrol craft. In small engagements we have a significant advantage. But in a large-scale assault," Helen said, thinking out loud, "you would need to neutralize their communications first to prevent them calling reinforcements. You would need to take out their sensor grid to avoid detection during your approach. You would need to hit multiple targets simultaneously to divide their forces. And you would need demolitions experts who understand Valtorian power systems to know where to place charges for maximum damage." Daniel nodded slowly. "That is why we need you. I am a warrior. I know how to fight and lead in combat, but I do not know how to plan operations on this scale. None of us do. We have the weapons but not the strategic knowledge to use them effectively." Helen turned to face him. "What about the other resistance cells? Have you tried coordinating with them?" "We have reached out," Daniel said. "Most do not trust us. They think we are a Valtorian trap, or that we are hoarding technology while others suffer. Some have tried to attack our villages to steal what we have. We have defended ourselves, but it has made cooperation difficult." Helen understood that problem. The resistance movement was fragmented with dozens of cells operating independently, and sometimes fighting each other over resources. She had tried to build alliances herself with limited success. Trust was hard to come by when everyone had seen betrayal and loss. Little Bird, who had been quiet during the tour, spoke up. "Mama used to say that humans fight best when they fight together. She said if we could unite the tribes again, like in the old days, we could push back the metal men. That is what she called the Valtorians." Metal men. Daniel's expression softened when his daughter mentioned her mother. He knelt down and put his hand on Little Bird's shoulder. "Your mother was wise," he said. "She understood that our strength comes from unity." He stood and looked at Helen. "My wife died 3 years ago defending this village from a Valtorian raid. She was a seer. She had visions of the future. In her final moments, she told me that a woman from the sky would come, a warrior who would help us unite the scattered people and lead them to victory. I did not understand what she meant until today when Little Bird called out for me to save you." Helen felt uncomfortable with the idea of prophecy and destiny. She believed in tactics and training and logistics, but she could not deny that something unusual had happened. She should have died when she jumped from that train. Instead, she had been saved by technology she did not understand, and brought to a place she did not know existed. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just chance. Either way, she was here now, and she had a choice to make. Grandmother Willow spoke again. "You do not have to decide now, child. Rest tonight. Eat. Heal. Tomorrow we will talk more, and you can ask all the questions you need to ask. But know this. If you choose to help us, we will give you everything we have. Our warriors. Our technology. Our trust. And if you choose to leave, we will help you return to your people, and we will wish you well." Helen appreciated that there was no pressure. She nodded. "Thank you. I need time to think." Little Bird took Helen's hand again. "Come," she said. "I will show you where you can sleep. We have a guest house near Grandmother's dwelling. It is very comfortable." As they walked back through the tunnel, Helen's mind raced with possibilities. If what Daniel said was true about the dimensional gateway, then time was running out. The resistance needed to do something decisive. But coordinating 300 fighters from 6 separate villages against a heavily defended target would be incredibly difficult. She would need detailed intelligence on the Nevada facility. She would need to know the capabilities of every warrior and every weapon. She would need to establish communication networks that the Valtorians could not intercept. Most importantly, she would need to earn the trust of people who had been betrayed too many times before. They emerged back into grandmother's dwelling. The sun was setting outside and the village was lighting evening fires. The smell of cooking food drifted on the air. Helen realized she could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. Little Bird led her to a small building near the plaza. Inside was a simple room with a bed and a table, and a window that looked out over the village. "It is not much," Little Bird said, "but the bed is soft and grandmother will bring you dinner soon." "Thank you," Helen said. "You have been very kind." Little Bird smiled. "Papa says kindness is strength. He says the Valtorians are cruel because they are afraid. We are kind because we are strong." With that, the little girl left, leaving Helen alone with her thoughts. She sat on the bed and looked out the window. Children were playing in the plaza. Adults were sharing meals and conversations. It looked peaceful and normal despite the war raging across the planet. These people had built something worth protecting. They had preserved hope and culture and community in the face of annihilation. Helen thought about the prisoners still on that transport train heading for Europa. She thought about the resistance fighters dying in pointless skirmishes because they lacked coordination and proper weapons. She thought about Earth slowly being stripped of resources and people, while the rest of humanity waited for a miracle that would never come on its own. Maybe she could not save everyone, but maybe she could save enough people to matter. Maybe that woman from the sky that Little Bird's mother had foreseen was actually her. Helen woke before dawn to find Little Bird sitting by her window watching the stars fade. The child turned when she heard Helen stir. "Good morning," the girl said quietly. "I brought you breakfast." She pointed to a tray on the table holding bread and fruit and some kind of meat. "Grandmother made it," she added. Helen sat up, feeling surprisingly good. Her shoulder barely hurt, and when she moved it, the joint felt almost normal. The nanotechnology bandage had done its work overnight. She touched the glowing material and felt it warm under her fingers. "Thank you for the food," Helen said. Little Bird came over and sat on the edge of the bed. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course, what were the cities like? The ones that are gone now. My mama told me stories, but I was too young to remember. I have only ever lived here." Helen thought about how to describe a world this child had never known. "The cities were loud and bright and full of people," she said. "Buildings reached toward the sky. Cars filled the streets. At night the lights were so bright you could barely see the stars." Little Bird's eyes went wide. "That sounds amazing. Do you miss it?" "Every day," Helen admitted. "But what I miss most are the people. Friends and family. Colleagues. A whole world of connections that the Valtorians destroyed." Little Bird nodded seriously. "Papa says the same thing. He misses Mama most of all. She was killed by the metal men when I was 4. I remember her a little bit. She used to sing to me and tell me I was special, that I would see things others could not see." Before Helen could respond, Grandmother Willow entered through the doorway. "Little Bird," she said gently, "your father needs you to help prepare for the morning training. Go now." Little Bird jumped up and ran out, leaving Helen alone with the old woman. Grandmother sat in the chair by the table. "Your shoulder is healing well," she observed. "By tonight the bandage will dissolve and you will be whole again." Helen touched her shoulder again. "Thank you. I have never seen medicine work this fast." "The keepers are masters of biological science," Grandmother said. "They taught us that healing is about working with the body's natural processes, not against them. The nanotechnology reads your cellular structure and provides exactly what is needed to repair damage. It is elegant technology, simple in concept but profound in execution." Helen got up and walked to the window. The village was coming to life below. Warriors were gathering in a training area. Children were being led to what looked like a school. Adults were starting their daily work. Everyone seemed purposeful and content. "This place should not exist," Helen said. "By every logical assessment, you should have been wiped out in the first year. How did you really survive?" Grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she began to speak. "My grandmother's grandmother was born in 1892, she said. She lived through the end of the old wars and saw our people forced onto reservations. She watched our culture being suppressed and our children taken to schools where they were punished for speaking our language. She grew old and bitter at what had been lost. But in her final years, something changed. She began having visions of beings from the sky. Not the metal men who would come later. Different beings. Ancient and wise. She tried to tell others, but most thought she was losing her mind. Then one night in 1975, she walked into the desert and disappeared. Search parties found no trace of her. Everyone assumed she had died. But 3 days later she returned. She was changed. Younger somehow, healthier, and she carried knowledge that should have been impossible. She gathered the tribal elders and told them what she had experienced. She had been taken to a ship hidden in orbit. The beings called themselves Keepers. They were explorers and teachers who had been watching Earth for thousands of years. They did not interfere often, but they recognized something in indigenous peoples across the world, a connection to land and spirit that reminded them of their own lost past. Grandmother stood and walked to the window beside Helen. The Keepers told my ancestor that a great danger was coming to Earth. Conquerors from another galaxy who had destroyed hundreds of worlds. The Keepers could not fight our battles for us because their own laws forbade direct intervention in wars between other species. But they could teach us. They could give us tools and knowledge if we promised to use them wisely and never for conquest ourselves. My ancestor accepted their offer. For the next 30 years, she worked with a small group of trusted people, learning everything the Keepers would teach. Science, engineering, medicine, philosophy. They built the first of these hidden villages and began training warriors to use Keeper weapons. When my ancestor finally died in 2005, she left behind a network of prepared communities. We continued her work in secret. We developed new technologies by combining Keeper principles with our own creativity. We prepared for a war we hoped would never come. Then in 2020, the Valtorians arrived and everything my ancestor predicted came true. Helen tried to process this information. 50 years of secret preparation, contact with alien benefactors who taught without conquering. It sounded impossible, but the evidence was all around her. Why did the Keepers not warn everyone? Helen asked. Why just you? Grandmother sighed. They tried. The Keepers contacted many governments and organizations offering knowledge and warning of the coming danger. But humans are suspicious of what they do not understand. Most governments assumed the Keepers were either a hoax or a threat. Some tried to capture Keeper ships to steal their technology. Others tried to weaponize the warnings to gain political advantage. The Keepers realized that humanity as a whole was not ready for open contact, so they focused on smaller groups who might preserve hope and knowledge through the dark times ahead. Indigenous peoples, remote communities, those who still remembered how to live close to the land and value wisdom over power. They found us and we accepted what they offered. Helen felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. If the governments had listened, maybe the invasion could have been stopped. Maybe millions would still be alive, but she understood why people had been skeptical. First contact with aliens was supposed to be the most important moment in human history. Instead, it had been ignored and dismissed until conquerors arrived and made the choice for everyone. Grandmother seemed to read her thoughts. Do not blame those who failed to believe, she said. The Keepers themselves told us that most civilizations make the same mistakes. Pride and fear blind people to truth until it is too late. What matters now is what we do with the knowledge we have. Will you help us, Helen Price? Will you use your strategic mind to coordinate our warriors and strike at the enemy? Helen turned from the window. I need to know more about the Nevada facility, she said. I need complete intelligence data. Patrol schedules. Defensive layouts. Power grid analysis. Weak points. I also need to understand exactly what your warriors can do. Their training. Their capabilities, their limits, and I need communication equipment that can reach the other resistance cells without being intercepted. If we are going to do this, we need more than 300 fighters. We need every cell that will stand with us. Grandmother smiled. Come, she said. Let me show you our command center. They left the guest house and walked through the village. People nodded respectfully as Grandmother passed. Some stared at Helen with curiosity. They reached a building carved into the mesa wall that looked unremarkable from outside. But when they entered, Helen found herself in a sophisticated operations center that would have impressed any military command. Holographic displays covered the walls showing real-time data from across the continent. Communication systems filled one corner. A large central table projected a three-dimensional map of North America, with every known Valtorian installation marked. Daniel was there along with several other warriors studying the Nevada facility. He looked up when Helen and Grandmother entered. I was hoping you would come, he said. We have updated intelligence from last night. One of our scouts got close enough to map the interior structure. He gestured and the holographic display zoomed in on the facility. Helen studied it with a tactical eye. The gateway itself was in the center of a massive complex. Power generators formed a ring around it. Command and control buildings sat on the perimeter. Defensive emplacements covered every approach. It was a fortress designed to withstand major assaults. "This is going to be harder than I thought," Helen said. "We cannot just charge in even with superior weapons. We need a multi-stage operation. Hit their power first to disable shields. Take out communications to prevent reinforcements. Create diversions to draw forces away from key targets. Then strike fast at the gateway with demolitions teams while the chaos covers our approach." Daniel nodded. "That matches what I was thinking, but I do not know how to coordinate that many moving parts." Helen looked at him. "How fast can you gather leaders from the other villages? We need a full council of war. Everyone needs to understand the plan and their role in it." "Within 2 days," Daniel replied. "I will send messengers immediately." Helen turned to the communication equipment. "And I need to contact the resistance cells, starting with my own. I have a second in command who is the best explosives expert I have ever known. If we can break him out of detention, he can teach your people how to properly sabotage Valtorian power systems." 3 days after Helen agreed to lead the operation, Daniel called a gathering of all the village leaders in the main cavern. Representatives came from the 6 hidden communities scattered across the Western territories. They arrived in small groups using the same holographic camouflage and stealth technology that had kept them hidden for 5 years. Helen watched them assemble in the council chamber, wondering if they would accept her leadership. Most were older than her, with more experience surviving in this new world. Why should they trust a naval officer who had just jumped from a prison train? The council chamber was a circular room carved from red rock with a fire pit in the center. Traditional designs covered the walls alongside holographic displays showing tactical information. The leaders sat in a semicircle. Helen recognized different tribal affiliations from their clothing and markings. There were Navajo and Apache and Hopi alongside the Comanche. Some wore traditional dress while others preferred practical combat gear. All of them carried themselves with the bearing of warriors who had seen too much death. Daniel stood to address the assembly. "Brothers and sisters," he began, speaking in English so Helen could understand. "Thank you for coming on short notice. I have called this council because the situation has changed. We can no longer afford to simply survive and hope the Valtorians leave. They are building something that will make the occupation permanent." He activated the holographic display showing the Nevada facility. "This is a dimensional gateway. Our scouts confirmed its purpose 2 weeks ago. When it becomes operational, the Valtorians will bring their entire battle fleet through from their home galaxy. Earth will become a staging ground for their expansion into this sector of space." Murmurs ran through the council. An older woman with silver hair and scars on her face spoke up. "We knew they were building something, but we did not know what. How long until it is complete?" 4 months, Daniel replied. "Maybe 5, which means we need to destroy it soon. But we cannot do this alone. We need to coordinate every warrior from every village. We need to reach out to the other resistance cells and convince them to join us. And we need someone with strategic military experience to lead the operation." He gestured toward Helen, who had been standing quietly in the shadows. "This is Lieutenant Commander Helen Price. 3 days ago she escaped from a Valtorian prison transport. My daughter asked me to save her and I did. Since then she has been studying our capabilities and our intelligence on the target. I believe she is the leader we need for this mission." Helen stepped forward, feeling all eyes on her. She had commanded sailors and Marines before the war, but this was different. These people had survived through preparation and wisdom, while the regular military had been crushed. They had every reason to doubt her. "I know you do not know me," Helen said. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I have spent the last 3 days studying everything you have built here. Your technology, your warriors, your tactical situation. And I believe with the right coordination and planning we can destroy that gateway, but it will require perfect timing and absolute trust. Every village will need to commit fighters. Every cell of the resistance that we can reach will need to participate. This cannot be done halfway." Daniel spoke again. "The Keepers gave us tools, but they did not teach us large-scale military strategy. That was not their way. Lieutenant Commander Price commanded warships before the invasion. She coordinated fleet operations involving thousands of people. She understands combined arms tactics and strategic planning in ways that we do not." A younger man stood up. His name was Running Wolf, and he led one of the northern villages. Why should we believe this stranger can succeed where we have only survived by staying hidden? What happens when this operation fails and brings the full weight of the Valtorians down on all of us? Our children will die. Our villages will burn. For what? A chance at striking one facility? Helen met his eyes. You are right to be cautious, she said. And you are right that failure means death for everyone. But consider what happens if we do nothing. The gateway becomes operational. The Valtorians bring unlimited reinforcements. Any hope of liberation dies forever. Your children grow up as slaves if they grow up at all. At least this plan gives us a fighting chance. Running Wolf sat down, but he did not look convinced. Grandmother Willow spoke next. Her voice carried the weight of years and wisdom. I have seen many things in my long life, she said. I watched the old world end and this new one begin. I have studied the Keeper teachings and I have learned to read the patterns of events. This woman came to us at the moment we needed her. Not by accident. Not by chance. She had the courage to leap from death toward uncertain life. That takes a special kind of spirit. I say we should trust her. Little Bird, who had been sitting beside her father, stood up. Everyone smiled at the serious expression on her young face. My mama told Papa that a woman from the sky would come and help us win, she said. I think Helen is that woman. I know I am just a child, but I feel it here. She put her hand over her heart. Helen is brave and smart, and she cares about keeping children safe. That is what a good leader does. Several council members nodded. Children's intuition was respected in these communities. Daniel spoke again. I propose that we put it to a vote. All in favor of asking Lieutenant Commander Price to lead this operation and committing our warriors to the mission, raise your hands. Helen held her breath. One by one, hands went up. First Grandmother Willow, then several others. Running Wolf hesitated but finally raised his hand as well. When the count was done, every leader had voted in favor. Daniel looked at Helen. It is decided. You have our warriors and our trust. Use them wisely. Helen felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Thank you, she said. I will not waste this opportunity. Now let me tell you what we need to do. She activated the holographic display and began explaining her plan. First, we need better intelligence on the facility. I want teams doing around-the-clock surveillance. I need to know shift changes, patrol patterns, supply deliveries, any weakness we can exploit. Second, we need to reach out to the resistance cells. I have contacts with at least 12 different groups. Some will not trust us, but some will. We need every fighter we can get. Third, we need to extract my second in command from a detention facility. He knows more about explosives and Valtorian power systems than anyone alive. Fourth, we need to train combined units. Your warriors are skilled, but they have never worked alongside resistance fighters who use conventional weapons. We need to practice coordination until it becomes second nature. Fifth, we need equipment. The Keepers gave you advanced weapons, but we need more. Can you manufacture additional lances and armor in the next 3 months? Daniel nodded. The Keepers left us fabrication technology. We can produce what you need. Good, Helen said. Then here is the operational plan. She manipulated the display showing the Nevada facility from multiple angles. The attack will happen in 3 phases. Phase 1 begins 2 hours before dawn with simultaneous strikes on 3 targets. Team Alpha will hit the power generation stations using electromagnetic pulse weapons to disable their shields. Team Bravo will assault the communications center and take it offline to prevent distress calls. Team Charlie will create a diversion on the east side of the facility, drawing forces away from the main objective. All 3 teams will be composed of mixed units. Your warriors for heavy combat and advanced weapons, resistance fighters for demolitions and technical support. Phase 2 begins when the power and communications are down. The main force will advance on the gateway chamber. We expect heavy resistance, so this will be the largest group. Daniel, you will lead this element because you are the best warrior you have. I will coordinate from a mobile command post and manage the overall battle. Phase 3 is the critical moment. Once we reach the gateway chamber, we plant demolition charges on the power conduits and the dimensional framework itself. The charges need to be placed exactly right, or the gateway will just repair itself. That is why we need my explosives expert. Then we extract under covering fire while the timer counts down. Running Wolf spoke up again. What about escape routes? Once we destroy the gateway, the Valtorians will pursue us with everything they have. Helen had anticipated this question. We split into multiple groups and evacuate in different directions. Some teams go north toward the Canadian territories. Some go south toward Mexico. Some disappear into the desert using your camouflage technology. We regroup at predetermined locations over the next week. The key is not letting them chase one large force. We become ghosts again. An older man named Standing Bear raised his hand. You said we need to convince other resistance cells to join us. How do we do that when most think we are myths or Valtorian tricks? Helen smiled grimly. We give them proof they cannot deny. I am going to contact my old cell. They know my voice and my command codes. I will tell them to spread the word. Then we stage a demonstration. We hit a small Valtorian target somewhere public. We use your advanced weapons where survivors can see them. We leave evidence that a well-equipped and well-trained force exists. Word will spread. Desperate people will seek us out. Some will be spies, and we will need to screen them carefully. The next 3 months passed in a blur of constant activity. Helen set up a command center in the largest cavern and filled it with displays showing every piece of intelligence they could gather. Teams of scouts rotated through surveillance positions around the Nevada facility, reporting every detail of Valtorian operations. Helen studied their reports until she could visualize the entire complex in her sleep. She knew which guards changed shifts at what times. She knew which patrol routes had blind spots. She knew where the power conduits ran underground, and which buildings contained the most valuable targets. Knowledge became her weapon as much as the plasma lances the warriors carried. Daniel coordinated training operations, bringing together fighters from all 6 villages. Warriors who had never worked with outsiders learned to operate alongside resistance fighters, who had survived on salvaged equipment and determination. The cultural differences created friction at first. The village warriors moved with disciplined precision, while the resistance fighters relied on improvisation and individual initiative. Arguments broke out over tactics and command structure. Helen spent hours mediating disputes and finding compromises that let both groups contribute their strengths. She also sent out carefully coded messages to every resistance cell she had ever worked with. The responses varied. Some ignored her completely. Others replied with suspicion, demanding proof that she was really alive and not a Valtorian trap. A few responded with desperate hope, asking when and where to meet. Helen arranged for representatives from 3 different cells to visit the hidden village. She showed them the technology and the training and the warriors. She explained the plan and asked for their commitment. 2 of the 3 agreed immediately. The third took a week to decide, but eventually joined as well. Word began spreading through the underground networks. There was a new force gathering. People who had given up hope started believing again. Helen received messages from cells she had never heard of asking how to make contact. By the end of the 2nd month, over 200 additional fighters had joined the operation, bringing the total force to more than 500. They came from all backgrounds. Former soldiers, police officers, engineers, teachers, people who had lost everything and wanted a chance to strike back. Helen organized them into units, based on their skills, and began the hard work of turning a collection of individuals into a coordinated fighting force. The rescue operation, to extract her second-in-command, happened 6 weeks into the preparation. Helen led a team of 30 fighters, including Daniel and some of his best warriors, to the detention facility, outside what used to be Denver. They hit the compound at midnight, using a combination of keeper camouflage technology and conventional explosives. The assault was textbook perfect. They disabled the perimeter sensors, cut through the outer fence, took out the guard towers with silent weapons, breached the main building, and fought room to room until they reached the detention cells. Helen found Commander Greg Harrison chained to a wall in a cell that stank of waste and despair. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes went wide. "Helen," he croaked. His voice was rough from dehydration. "They said you were dead." "Nearly," was Helen replied, cutting his chains with a plasma blade. "But I found friends." "Can you walk?" Greg tried to stand, but his legs collapsed. Daniel appeared and lifted the man easily. "I have him," Daniel said. "Let us get out of here." They extracted with only 2 wounded and no dead. The Valtorians were caught completely off guard by an attack using technology they did not expect. Greg recovered in grandmother, Willow's care, and within a week he was teaching demolition teams exactly where to place charges on Valtorian power systems. Little Bird became a constant presence around Helen during those months. The child would appear at the command center bringing food and asking questions about everything Helen was doing. "Why do you mark the maps that way?" she would ask. "How do you know which team goes where? What happens if someone gets scared during the battle?" Helen found herself answering honestly, never talking down to the girl. Little Bird had a sharp mind, and she absorbed information like a sponge. Sometimes late at night when Helen was alone studying intelligence reports, Little Bird would sit nearby doing her own schoolwork. The girl's presence was comforting in a way Helen had not expected. It reminded her why the operation mattered. They were not just fighting against the Valtorians. They were fighting for a future where children like Little Bird could grow up free. One evening, Little Bird looked up from her work. "Helen, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Helen replied. "Are you scared?" "About the battle, I mean." Helen considered lying but decided the girl deserved truth. "Yes," she said. "I'm scared. Scared that I will make mistakes. Scared that people will die because of my decisions. Scared that we will fail and everything will be lost." Little Bird nodded seriously. "Papa says being scared is okay. He says courage is not about not being scared. It is about doing what needs to be done even when you are scared." "Your father is wise," Helen said. Little Bird smiled. "He learned it from Mama. She was scared too, but she fought anyway." Training intensified as the deadline approached. Helen drilled the teams until they could execute the plan in their sleep. She ran simulations using the holographic displays, making the warriors and fighters respond to every possible contingency. What if the power does not go down? What if reinforcements arrive early? What if the gateway has additional defenses they had not detected? Greg worked with the demolition teams, teaching them the precise placement and timing needed to collapse a dimensional gateway. "It is not just about blowing things up," he explained. "It is about understanding the energy flow and disrupting it at critical junctures. One mistake and the gateway survives. We get one shot at this, so we better make it count." Daniel trained the assault teams in close quarters combat. The Valtorians were larger and stronger than humans, but they were also slower. Daniel taught techniques for using that against them. Stay mobile. Attack weak points. Use their size to trap them in confined spaces. Never stand and trade blows because you will lose. Hit and move. Strike and fade. Be water, not rock. Helen watched him train and was impressed by how he combined traditional warrior philosophy with modern tactical thinking. 2 weeks before the operation, Helen received disturbing news from the scouts. The Valtorians had increased patrols around the Nevada facility. They were also conducting sweeps of the surrounding desert. It looked like they suspected something was coming. Helen called an emergency meeting with Daniel and the team leaders. "They think we are coming," she said. "Not specifically, but they are preparing for the possibility. We need to decide if we proceed or delay." Greg studied the updated intelligence. "If we delay, they just get stronger. The gateway is almost complete. In another month it goes operational and then it is too late. We have to hit them now, even if they are expecting trouble." Running Wolf, who had become one of Helen's strongest supporters, agreed. Surprise was always an advantage, but it was never guaranteed. "We knew this might happen. The plan is solid. We adapt and we execute." Daniel looked at Helen. "It is your decision, Commander. What do you want to do?" Helen thought about everything they had built over the past months. The training, the coordination, the hope they had given to hundreds of fighters. She thought about Little Bird and all the children waiting safely in the hidden villages. She thought about the prisoners on Europa and the occupied cities and the 5 years of defeat and despair. "Sometimes you had to risk everything to gain anything. We proceed," she said, "but we move up the timeline. We attack in 1 week instead of 2. That gives them less time to strengthen defenses. We hit them before they are fully ready." The room went silent as everyone absorbed the change. Then one by one the team leaders nodded. "1 week," Daniel said. "Then we show the Valtorians that humanity is not beaten." The next 7 days were chaos. Final equipment checks, last-minute training, personal preparations as fighters said goodbye to loved ones not knowing if they would return. Helen barely slept. She reviewed the plan, constantly looking for flaws. She walked through the villages talking to warriors and resistance fighters, giving encouragement and answering last-minute questions. She sent final messages to the cells who could not join, explaining what was about to happen and asking them to be ready to capitalize on any success. On the night before the operation, Helen sat alone in the command center, staring at the holographic map of Nevada. Tomorrow everything would change one way or another. Either they would strike a blow that shifted the momentum of the war, or they would die trying. There was no middle ground. Little Bird found her there. The girl climbed into Helen's lap without asking and put her arms around her neck. "You are going to win," she said with absolute certainty. "How do you know?" Helen asked. "Because you have to," the girl replied. "The world needs you to win. So you will." Helen hugged the child tight. "I hope you are right," she whispered. Little Bird pulled back and looked at her seriously. Promise me something. Anything, Helen said. Promise me you will come back. You and Papa both. Promise me I will not lose anyone else I love. Helen felt tears burn her eyes. She had not cried since the invasion began, but this child's faith broke something loose inside her. The assault force moved out 3 hours before dawn. 500 fighters traveling in groups using every stealth technology the Keepers had provided. Vehicles that made no sound floated across the desert terrain. Camouflage fields bent light around the warriors, making them nearly invisible. Helen rode in the lead vehicle with Daniel and Greg monitoring communications from all teams. The Nevada facility appeared on the horizon as a cluster of lights against the dark sky. It looked peaceful from a distance, but Helen knew every light represented sensors and weapons and guards, ready to kill anyone who approached. She checked her plasma rifle for the 10th time. The weapon felt comfortable in her hands after months of training. Daniel sat beside her, calm and focused. His lance rested across his knees, glowing faintly in the darkness. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "As ready as I will ever be," Helen replied. I have been preparing for this my whole life," Daniel said. "My father taught me that a warrior's purpose is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Today we fulfill that purpose." Greg leaned forward from the back seat. "All teams report ready," he said. "We are go for Phase 1 on your command." Helen took a deep breath and keyed her communicator. "All teams, this is command. Proceed to Phase 1 positions. Execute on my mark. Acknowledge." The responses came back one by one. Team Alpha moving to power stations. Team Bravo approaching communications center. Team Charlie ready for diversion. Main assault force standing by. Helen watched the chronometer counting down. Everything depended on timing. If one team moved too early or too late, the whole operation could collapse. The seconds ticked away. Finally, the chronometer hit 0. "All teams execute," she said. Mark Team Alpha struck first. 20 warriors led by Running Wolf hit the 3 power generation stations simultaneously. Electromagnetic pulse weapons fired, disabling shields and sensors. Then the warriors moved in with plasma lances, cutting through Valtorian guards before they could react. Explosives planted on key transformers detonated in sequence. The facility's power grid flickered and failed. Emergency lights kicked in, but they provided only dim illumination. Team Bravo, under a resistance fighter named Captain Sarah Lee, assaulted the communications center. They breached the outer wall using shaped charges. Resistance fighters poured through the gap, engaging Valtorian defenders, while village warriors targeted the communication equipment with precision strikes. Within 5 minutes, the center was offline. No distress signals would leave the facility. Team Charlie created their diversion on the eastern perimeter. They fired rockets and heavy weapons, making as much noise as possible. Valtorian forces rushed to respond, thinking the main attack was coming from that direction. The diversion worked perfectly, drawing away 2/3 of the facility's defenders. "Now," Helen said. "Main force advance." Daniel's vehicle surged forward with dozens of others following. They crossed the outer perimeter where Team Alpha had cleared the defenses. Valtorian guards emerged from barracks trying to organize a response, but they were confused and partially blinded by the power loss. The assault force hit them like a hammer. Village warriors with their advanced weapons carved through enemy formations. Resistance fighters used conventional tactics to flank and overwhelm. Helen coordinated from her mobile command post, directing units to exploit weaknesses as they appeared. The Valtorians fought back fiercely. Their plasma weapons lit up the darkness. Explosions rocked the facility. Helen saw fighters go down. Some got back up, some did not. She forced herself to focus on the big picture. Individual losses were tragic, but the mission had to succeed. Greg called out targets for the demolition teams. "There. That building houses power conduits for the gateway. Take it down." Warriors rushed forward and planted charges. The building exploded, sending debris into the sky. The main force fought its way deeper into the facility. Daniel led from the front, his lance flashing as he cut down Valtorians. Helen had seen him train, but seeing him in actual combat was different. He moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. Every strike was precise and economical. He never wasted motion or energy. Warriors followed his example, pushing forward with discipline and courage. But the Valtorians were adapting. A massive warrior in ornate armor emerged from the central command building. It stood 9 feet tall and carried a weapon that looked like a cannon fused with a spear. The commander roared something in its language, and Valtorian forces rallied around it. The commander fired its weapon. A beam of pure energy cut through 3 resistance fighters instantly. Their bodies fell smoking. The commander advanced, sweeping its weapon across the battlefield. More fighters died. Morale wavered. Daniel saw the threat and changed direction. He charged toward the commander, calling out a war cry that echoed across the facility. The 2 warriors met in the center of the battlefield. Lance against massive weapon. Human courage against alien power. They fought with incredible speed and violence. Daniel landed strikes that would have killed lesser opponents, but the commander's armor absorbed the damage. The commander's weapon smashed into Daniel's shield, sending him staggering. Helen watched from her command vehicle, unable to help. She wanted to rush in, but she had to coordinate the overall battle. Trust him, she told herself. Trust his training and his courage. The gateway chamber lay ahead, protected by the last line of defenders. Helen directed teams to suppress the guards with covering fire. Greg and his demolition experts prepared to rush forward. "We need 30 seconds to place the charges," he said. "Can you give us that?" Helen looked at the tactical display. 30 seconds seemed like an eternity. "Yes," she said. "Go now." Greg and 5 other demolitions experts sprinted toward the gateway chamber. Valtorians turned to engage them, but Helen directed concentrated fire on those positions. Plasma bolts and conventional bullets filled the air, creating a wall of suppression. Greg reached the gateway and began working. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, attaching explosive packages to the dimensional framework. 15 seconds, 20. Daniel was still fighting the commander. Both warriors were wounded, now blood running down Daniel's arm, and the commander's armor cracked in several places. They circled each other, looking for openings. The commander lunged forward with devastating force. Daniel sidestepped, but not quite fast enough. The weapon caught him in the ribs and sent him flying. He crashed into a wall hard. His lance fell from his grip. The commander advanced to finish him. Helen did not think. She abandoned her command post and sprinted across the battlefield. Her plasma rifle was in her hands, and she was firing before she consciously decided to do so. The bolts hit the commander in the back, making it turn. Helen threw herself between the massive alien and Daniel. The commander raised its weapon to crush her. Helen emptied her entire power pack into its chest at point-blank range. The armor finally failed. The commander staggered backward, wounded but not dead. Daniel struggled to his feet. "Go," he gasped. "Get back to command. I have this." "No," Helen said. "We fight together or not at all." The commander was recovering, preparing for another attack. Greg's voice came over the communicator. "Charges set. We need to extract now." Helen helped Daniel stand. They moved together, supporting each other as the commander pursued. Warriors rushed in to cover their retreat, firing everything they had at the massive alien. The commander swatted them aside like insects, but they bought precious seconds. Helen and Daniel reached the extraction point where vehicles were waiting. Daniel collapsed into a seat, his breathing labored. Helen keyed her communicator. "All teams fall back. Extraction pattern Delta, move now." The assault force began pulling back in organized groups. They fought as they retreated, making the Valtorians pay for every foot of ground. Team Charlie broke off their diversion and raced to join the main force. Team Bravo destroyed the communications equipment completely before withdrawing. Team Alpha set final charges on the power stations. The facility was in chaos. Valtorians tried to pursue, but without power and communications, they could not coordinate effectively. The assault force split into predetermined groups and scattered in multiple directions. Some went north. Some went south. Some disappeared into the desert using camouflage. Helen's vehicle carried Daniel, who was seriously injured but alive. Greg sat in the back, monitoring the detonator. 3 minutes to explosion, he announced. Helen pushed the vehicle to maximum speed. They needed distance before the gateway collapsed. The desert flew past in darkness. 2 minutes. The facility was falling behind, but Helen could see Valtorian ships launching in pursuit. They would not make it far enough before those ships caught them. Daniel opened his eyes despite his pain. "Use the emergency shield," he said. "The vehicle has keeper defensive systems. Activate them now." Helen found the control and pressed it. A bubble of energy formed around the vehicle, just as the first Valtorian ship opened fire. Energy bolts splashed harmlessly against the shield. 1 minute. Helen saw other vehicles from the assault force scattered across the desert, all racing away from the facility. Some were under fire. Some had already been destroyed. She forced herself not to look. 30 seconds. The Valtorian ships were closing in, preparing for another attack. Then the charges detonated,